Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to the Centre Culturel Irlandais and to this conversation this evening. This conversation marks the opening of this exhibition of new work by Paul Seawright, shown for the first time here in Paris, delighted to say, coinciding with Paris Photo. No doubt many of you are here for Paris Photo, so you're welcome. I'm delighted that we can open with a talk by two renowned photographers, both from Northern Ireland, Donovan Wylie and Paul Seawright, who'll be in conversation here for about 40 minutes. Won't be taking questions after, in so much as maybe in private afterwards. We'll take conversations. They'll be here for the opening, and I hope you'll stay on. Delighted that the publication has arrived, wonderful publication, which will be on sale also for those of you who are interested in taking a signed copy home with you. And also, I'd just like to say how grateful we are to the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, the British Council and Culture Ireland for making this possible. And now please welcome Donovan Wylie and Paul Seawright.
Hello.
Don't be singing.
I think Paul, do you want to introduce me? Or should I introduce you?
I'll introduce you first. So actually, when I asked Donovan to do this, we were away somewhere, I don't know, in Hong Kong, was it? And he said, I'll do it, but like we're turning into a bit of a band. You know, we seem to be doing this conversation. This is our third or fourth time doing one of these conversations, but because we work together, we talk about photography and each other's work all the time, so it's good to be sitting with someone who knows your work. And more than that, actually, Donovan, I must say, was witness to the development of this work, and we'll talk a bit about that probably this morning. So Donovan is a Magnum photographer. I'm sure you know his work as well, and we have a lot of crossovers between our two practices and the way we work and the subjects we've worked on over the years. And we both also work at Belfast School of Art at Ulster University. So,
Well, you know, when Paul asked me to do this, I was sort of, as he said, you know, we're turning into a bit of a band. And what we tend to do is sort of improvise. You know, we don't really have a very formalistic set of questions that, you know, are sort of thought out. There's a general sort of flow and a general theme. And really for this evening, I was thinking I really wanted to talk to Paul a bit about the whole idea of the process of this work, simply because I've known it from really when it began, and I've seen it take various twists and turns, and I think it'll be interesting for you to hear what Paul has to say about that. And every work has a process, and every process is different. I guess the first thing we should really kick off with is the question of how did you simply come to this idea?
I mean, that's a question that students are often asking, you know, where do the ideas come from? And I guess each project evolves out of the last project. I mean, there's no kind of sitting there trying to pluck ideas out of there. I don't have an ideas bank that I kind of return to when I can't think what to do next. Projects just kind of naturally evolve, and I've been making work in America now for about 4 or 5 years. I'm determined to stop doing that. I have a show in January of a third body of work from America at the Curlin in Dublin, and I'm kind of determined that'll be my last, and it's only happened because of this, the way projects evolve from one to the other, and it's because it's been in America. So I was making that work, the volunteer work, which you'll know, of course, about military recruitment centres in America. And I guess maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, when I was in America doing that work, I had this idea for a project, or project's the wrong word, but I'd been wanting to make photographs about how news was constructed. So all of my work is very interested in conflict and basically art, conflict, and society. That's the context. And so I'm in America thinking, of course, about military recruitment, making the volunteer project, and watching TV at night in the hotel, and very conscious watching American news that they never, you know, they're very involved in the world, and yet you never hear them talking about their involvement in the world in their own country. And that shouldn't have surprised me, but you know, you think that's maybe just Fox, but it's all those news channels, and the more you kind of look through them, the more that became apparent. So I was on a trip to America, and I contacted 2 news stations, one when I was in St. Louis and one when I was in San Diego.
But the moment when you thought news station, did you think visually as well as, okay, conceptually that could work? Or were you also thinking that could be photographic?
I kind of thought I wanted to go and have a look. I think that's where I would always start. I mean, it's a research thing. I mean, there's as much research going on in anything that I do. I mean, the research for this, then you could really say, was almost 3 years of research, 2.5 years. The actual production of the work is compressed into a 5-week period. And so I went along to these 2 places, made some photographs, had a look. And I did come back with one photograph that has survived in the publication.
But when you first went in, did
Yes.
you when you first go in to a place that you're going to maybe make work about, or you experience it for the first time, did you think, wow, this is amazing, or did you kind of go, I'm not sure, or were you turned on by it? I mean, not turned off.
Not even necessarily visually. I mean, for me, the big difficulty immediately was going to be that these aren't the kind of photographs that I make. I'm a landscape photographer, and I wanted to kind of see, could you think of the TV news studio as a landscape? So that was the first thing to look, and could it be photographed at that kind of distance as a landscape, and think about it in the same way? So you might have been inside, but could you photograph it in the same way you photographed outside, with that way I normally photograph, which is very much about editing the landscape and creating this kind of edited space. There was a second concept that kind of was this, trying to look for them talking about conflict. So if I spent a day at a station, how often would they talk about conflict? And would there be something interesting in me only making the photograph while they were talking about conflict? So I kind of played with some of those ideas, and that was harder than I thought it would be, because of course they didn't talk about conflict.
So it didn't feel certain at first?
So it most certainly didn't feel certain. So I came back from all of that. I had one photograph I liked, actually. I showed it once. But for me, it just didn't seem to... It didn't come alive as a project. I mean, for me, visually is not the thing that makes something successful. So the success has to come from what the project means.
Well, I was actually going to ask this later, but it's a good moment to ask it now. So that idea that you weren't certain at first, is that pretty common when you go out and make projects? When you make work?
Oh,
like
yeah.
in past work, is it, or have there been projects where you feel you're pretty certain at a pretty early stage?
Well, it's probably more interesting to any photographers here to say that I have invested a lot of money in working on a body of work, and went and made that work and done all the research for it, and have never done a single thing with any of the pictures because it has not worked. And I think that's the process of making work for anybody. We do things that that don't work. Yeah. So you have to be prepared to do that. And this was one of those projects. I kind of had done that research, tried that out, thought about it, and there was something just didn't. But sometimes it's just to do with what else you're doing. And I was focused on doing something else. And I hadn't really thought about going back to it until, actually it was Nora who, in relation to this show, because the work in January is the other work I've been spending 3 years working on. So we were talking about what we could do here, and she was saying, I've seen one of those news pictures you've done. I'd be really interested in that. So it made me kind of rethink about it, and did a bit more research, did some more thinking, and I thought, okay, I'll go back and have another go. And I remember actually saying at the time to Nora, this show may not be this show, because...
Well, I remember you saying to me, I'm not sure. There was a real apprehension about the project, and then you talked about access. So I wanted to come in on that, because you got in contact with 2 stations, and then you decided to go back to it and revisit it as an idea, and you believed it had some legs. You then had I presume, renegotiate access for different places, and was that you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, there was a middle point. Actually, this is maybe one of the reasons I also didn't continue with the work, in a sense. After I made the first time I went to those 2 cities, and I did 4 different stations, I emailed them, asked them, could I come and do it? They must have checked me out, and all of them said yes. So I did those 4. About a year and a half, maybe 2 years later, when I was back in the States doing this current project, I thought I would try some more, and contacted maybe 12 stations, and every one of them said no.
So what was all that about?
Well, my theory, it's hard to know what it was about, but I actually think Volunteer had been published. And of course, everything's been written about that book and that body of work, is that it's a critique of America and a critique of the war. And in North America, you just cannot openly critique the war or the military, and I understand that. And it's not meant to be an open critique of that. It's meant to be a critique of process, and then by kind of almost as a byproduct of the work, it's also a critique of contemporary American cities. And
Also a way
as
of
soon
looking.
as soon as they look me up, I imagine they see all this stuff and think, oh, we don't want to be involved with that. That's my guess, because then when I went back this time, I had a researcher working on it, and they contacted them saying that we're doing this project on American TV news stations, and could we send a photographer? And we didn't mention my name, and they all said yes.
And were you nervous going back into it? Given that you weren't too sure about the project, you were still testing it out. You had been turned down a lot, and then here you're kind of walking into the theatre again. Did it feel strange?
I mean, I think that's something that always feels strange. I mean, I think particularly when you have the pressure of a show and a book and all of that, that doesn't help. Actually, it's better if you don't have that. For me, with this piece of work, the nervousness was about these don't look like my photographs. Well, some of them look like some of the RUC photographs from 20 years ago. There's certainly that sense of some of those interior spaces feel very similar to some of those interior pictures. But apart from that, I kind of worried that I couldn't get... I suppose I couldn't get the subtlety in the work in terms of the meaning that I wanted. So it was very important to me that the work had to be still about conflict. It's about contemporary conflict. And I had that sorted in my head. I knew what I was looking for, but you never know if you're going to find it. And actually, on the very first day shooting in Fargo, North Dakota, I did 4 stations, and on station number 2, it just kind of clicked, and I made a picture and thought, actually, I think it's that picture at the back there, and thought, I remember standing, looking at that space, thinking about the parallels between the kind of drone operation rooms in American military bases, and I'd been in 2 of those in Vegas a number of years ago, and that sense of a kind of technological space and how war really has become that kind of space, and the parallels between all of that. And then, of course, you think about things you've read, and the Virillo quote comes from Virillo's Desert Screen. And in that, he had written about, weapons of mass communication. And
maybe just talk about that quote for those who may not know
this quote.
about it.
Well, I mean, the different quote was when he writes about weapons of mass communication instead of weapons of mass destruction. And he talks about when the first Scud missiles were launched in 91, they were on the very same day they launched 2 media satellites into space, and the whole parallels between war and media. And so that's in your head, and you're making the work, and as that begins to work, then the juices start flowing, and you're looking for very particular photographs.
I mean, did you ever feel at times, I mean, you haven't done it at all, but did you ever feel at times that the idea would need to almost be illustrated, or did you get beyond that?
I mean, there's a difference between the show and the publication in that sense. The show is an edit where I feel it's not at all ever illustrated, and that's quite important. And I would always be holding back from that. This is not an editorial piece to try to describe anything or illustrate what a news studio looks like. If it was trying to do that, it's failed spectacularly. But there are a couple of images in the publication that kind of do show more openly the studio space. And I kind of sometimes think it's just necessary they would never be works on the wall, but in the publication they work in terms of opening that up.
Well, I guess it's maybe an interesting question to ask, because books are more recent in your career than before. So when you were making this, were you thinking book or were you thinking wall?
No, I was thinking this. I was thinking this show, this room. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's we know we've talked about this a lot, and that is the way I work. I was really thinking about a dozen pieces, maximum, 13, 14 pieces that would be in a gallery. That's the way I think. It's the way I'm wired. It was you that thought of the book, not me. In fact, we were talking about that work and talking about how some of those had worked, and that cluster picture at the beginning. It's a cluster of lights, but of course the whole idea of that and the technology and the green screen and night vision and all that stuff began to come to the surface. And as that began to work, and we actually talked about how the military still use that term, theatre of war. I mean, you hear people say that, you think surely don't use that term, but absolutely they say.
Yeah. Do they really say theatre?
They do say theatre. They say we're in theatre.
Yeah,
don't
that's
they?
right. Yeah, that's right.
And so that whole theatrical element was something that started to play out in the work, and I thought, this is really interesting. So we started talking about that when we were in China, and
Well, you said
I showed you the work.
Well, you'd been showing me the work, and I could really see it as a gallery piece. So it was that was very clear. But then you said something which I can't quite remember to quote perfectly, but you can say it for me. And it's in the text, but you give the work a context in the sense of war and communication, and via that. And when you said it so precisely, I suddenly realized the work had multiple layers that therefore you should push further. You should take it into a publication and drive it. And strangely, I sometimes think it has got more layers and maybe even volunteer, but I could be wrong about that. But it's just something I wrote in my notes. I think this work, it evolved as a sort of interesting idea. It could go somewhere, but it sort of manifested in actually a really dense, solid, multi-layered piece of work. Is that a surprise? Because I think it is a bit of a surprise for you.
It's always a surprise. I mean, I think the difference...
There was a moment you went, shit, it might be right. Yeah.
Because I kind of started out, this is me trying to revisit a field project.
Well, okay, I finally got him to say it. That's what I was waiting for.
But no, really, it was a project I'd kind of thought, I'm not going to do that project.
I remember very clearly, yeah. But I think that idea of revisiting a failed project is absolutely fascinating, and how that's manifested and what it's become. That's for me the most.
But I think the difference, you say, it's more successful than volunteer, and I think it's because in volunteer it's hard to get away from. I mean, it's a landscape book, landscape photographs, and they're made in a long tradition of landscape photographs of America. It's very rooted in the new topographics. It's so all those references feel very familiar to those of us who know about photography. So, and it's deliberate. I mean, that's me. I mean, I'm the kind of I'm a modernist at heart, and that's very much in that body of work. And I think sometimes that obscures the potentiality of some of the layering. So for this project, there was really no existing visual trope that I was trying to reference, or I was finding myself in a space trying to make photographs.
So it feels weirdly looser and yet rigorous.
Yes, as I say, the closest I could get was the policing spaces that I'd photographed in the 1990s.
I might just digress on that idea of rigor and looseness. I mean, contemporary photography over the last 5-10 years has sort of become so machine-like that there's almost no
typologies. You're going to say now?
Well, just all of it. I mean, it's just the subjectivity of photography has sort of almost been strangulated, and I mean, I personally feel almost in reaction to that, you need to bring more subjectivity in. And I sort of feel it here a bit. You've allowed yourself to go looser. And where's that going? What's
well, I mean, I think
there?
You and I are both. Both our work is systematic. In terms of its approach, the methodology is a systematic methodology, and I like that because I'm a busy person, and it helps to have a systematic approach to making work. I mean, that's a very pragmatic thing.
But it's also
you can be systematic and still be loose. But of course, we both have. So you'll take your Watchtower series. So they are systematic in that you're photographing each Watchtower and so on. Volunteer even, I know you go to each site, you must make the picture on that site, on that place. So you're very restricted in what you can do.
Well, which you've retained here, and indeed which I still
so there's
retain.
an element there is a systematic element to this in terms of there is a studio, you must make the picture in the studio. But of course, in terms of being able to, it's not quite street photography where you're wandering about the street looking to make pictures, but you are in a studio space casting around to make a photograph, and actually you would think there's great potential in that, but the reality is once you've done 40 of these TV studios, that they become very, very similar. Yeah. And then the challenge is to get past the studio itself and try and get to the content, to the idea.
Yeah, which is very liberating when you get there.
When it works, when it works.
Okay, on a different note, did you have a working title at the beginning to the one that you have here?
No.
Did you have any sort of working
title? No, there
title?
was a working title.
Do you dare tell us?
Well, you know the working title because the invite has the working title. Because unfortunately, making news was the working title,
yeah,
or
that's
constructing news
That's
was my first, the first idea. But that was too much about the process of news, which is where the first idea of the field project came from, which is this is about the construction of news.
So, I mean, do you use working titles as sort of reminders of what the work's about?
Always. It's kind of it's something you do when you're making the work to have the title in your head. So Invisible Cities, when I was making that work in Africa.
It helps you understand.
That helps you understand what you're doing.
Exactly. It helps
it gives you context.
Yeah,
but the title itself did come at the editing stage. I mean, this whole project became successful in the editing stage rather than the making stage, and everything, the title, all of it. In fact, I'm doing a keynote at a conference in Atlanta in February, and they've been hassling me for a title for the talk. There's no title for my talk. I don't know titles for a talk. And the guy just came back to me and said, but with Things Left, I mean, he saw the name of this book. He says, Things Left Unsaid is the perfect title for your talk because it covers all of your work. And that idea in all of the work that that I don't actually include in the image, the thing that you're talking about, that it's kind of left undescribed, and that. So there's that kind of duality of the title, because of course it's talking about what's not said in terms of American news and what's let's not talk about the war kind of idea. But it's also saying in my photographic work, there's an awful lot of things that are left unsaid because they're left to be said by the person looking at the photograph.
Do you think the work needs a title that can really help you into the ideas of the work?
Absolutely. I mean,
is there a balance that you have to find?
Well, there's always a balance because I think for photography or anything to work within the context of art practice within the gallery, it can't give its meaning up too quickly. It has to withhold something in order for the audience to have space to do something. And so if you go too far the other way, it becomes completely abstract. So there was a review on RTE, the view of Volunteer, actually, when it was shown in Dublin. And one of the reviewers said, but that show, you go into it, and unless you read the title, you wouldn't know what it was about. I think, well, that's exactly the point. So the title is just a way in, and I think it has to open it up. I mean, I've gone one step further, and there's a quote. So the quote is on the wall of the gallery, and it's in the book, which is the Virillo quote about electronic warfare, and warfare not being about the landscape and the horizon, but being about television screen. And for me, that is needed to key the work up, because it's very important for me for you to understand I'm not just talking about news, I'm trying to talk about war.
So the actual phrase, Things Left Unsaid, how did that happen?
I don't know. I mean, these things rattle around your head. You make notes, and I've never used a poetic title. It's quite poetic, I guess. They've always been very, I mean, what are they? Invisible Cities, I guess, but that came out of Calvino's book. But this, I guess it was a response to the working title. The working title was too bold, and it did not open up the work in the way that it needed to. So I kind of had to find something that did that, and it just kind of appeared. I mean, Things Left Unsaid, or Those Things Not Said, or there was a number of those kind of variations of that. But
so just to the book, how many images we have here? 24?
I don't know, actually. Maybe
26. 26. So what was the? I mean, I've glimpsed the book. I haven't properly spent time with it.
It arrived from Belgium from the printer about an hour before we started, so we've only just.
But there is a real sense of flow in it. I mean, back to almost new topographics and the Rochester School of Thinking of visual flow in your sequence. How did you do it? What was the thinking behind the edit and the sequence?
I mean, that you might think that's visual, but it's not. Usually for me, that edit and sequence is nearly always about the narrative of the work. So it's about getting that right. So I always try to start with the beginning and the end and then work from there, because you're trying to build a sense. I mean, it starts with this image of the fire, which is kind of the most, I mean, it's like a thump, really, at the beginning.
It's interesting because, pictures on a cover are always tricky because they can give the game away. And yet, you know, there's been a fashion over the last few years to have no picture on the cover, and yet I have this instinctive need that you should put a picture on the cover.
So have I.
So, but interestingly, in some of the last books I've done, the picture on the cover, I end up making the first picture of the book, but your cover picture is the last picture of the book. Was that intentional?
Yeah, I mean, that picture's entitled Void, and also it's cropped on the... Well, it's not...
But is it because we see it in the cover? Is it because we see it in the cover that you leave it to the back?
No. It's very much because the whole... I mean, that image in the cover is not just the image, because, of course, the image in the cover is half
the image, yeah.
And the whole image is wrapped around, so because
right.
the other half of that image is black, as you see it over there. So, for me, and the title of that image is called Void, and it is about looking into this void, and the newsreader looking into that void, and us negotiating that void. So for me, as the final picture, the her staring into that blackness just worked in terms of the narrative of the piece.
Now there's certain elements where it breaks. You got white page breaks. How was that? What was the? It's almost like in sections, but it's not, is it? It's just a balance of flow.
It's a flow, yeah. I mean, you're talking book stuff to me, which I don't know anything about. I could talk to you more about how it's hung and.
Well, how do you feel about? I mean, how do you feel about the process of book making now that you've done a few of them?
You know, I don't get as turned on about it as you do, but I mean, you know. We used to share a space, you know, and I'm making big prints for the wall, and Donovan's making lots of wee books all cut up. You know, it's quite funny. You know, you're always walking around with little folded sheets of paper.
Yeah.
And I'm always rolling these big prints in the corner.
Yeah.
And that's a difference. It's just not the way I think.
But do you like the permanence of a book?
Well, that's the reason you do it. I mean, I think
But
the reason of doing
do you
the
experience it? Do you experience your work? I mean, obviously, you experience it completely differently when it's on a wall to when it's in a book. But I mean, how do you experience it as a book? How does it feel for you when you're looking through it? Oh, but I guess that's any photographic book.
I always feel disappointed in the book in comparison to the show. So standing here today, when we finished the lighting and we did the show, I think this is the bit I love. Just saying to Nora, you know, actually making the work. I hate making the work. You know, I'm on record as saying that. I don't enjoy making photographs. It's labor. That's work. You know, not one of these people, you know, gets off on the camera or the process or can't stand it. The bit for me I really love is seeing it being hung on the wall, and when it turns into a body of work, and the people are able to see it and talk about it. So standing here today and just taking it, you know, in the space on my own when the guys finished lighting it, that's the moment for me. The book came and it's great, but it's secondary. It's always secondary.
Okay.
Because actually, whereas it's brilliant, of course, you know, the only people who are going to see that are the people who see this today and over the next couple of months, but the book will be seen for years, so it's stupid not to do a book. So that's what's brilliant about doing the book, and that it has a longevity that a show can never have.
And it has its own experience.
But the ideal place to experience this is, you know, the drama of the studio, the drama of the gallery. That for me, you know, can only commute so far in the book.
So when we were talking about earlier that you're making it for this show, did you also think just what you just said, that the idea of the TV studios can be a great gallery piece?
Yeah, I think so. And
because I know when I did Maze, I was thinking it could be a great book because of the repetition and you don't know what's coming next. Whereas in a gallery, it kind of feels because it's all there, and you don't see what's coming next.
Well, there's a certain bit of, spectacle is a certain part. I mean, this show lends itself to that in a way some of the other work might not really. So yeah, I mean, I think I always thought that would be the ideal scenario.
Okay, I just want to go back on something that you said about labour.
For time, we feel like I've been talking for ages. We have about 5 minutes.
Really, that's good. We get into it, don't we?
There you go.
Look, let me finish on labour. I mean, I completely empathise with you when you talk about making photographs being work and not enjoyable. I fully understand, and the camera isn't a thing that, you know, I love motorbikes, but I really have no interest in cameras. You know, it's a purely functional thing, a camera.
You're a liar. You love the camera.
I don't. I don't.
What do you think, Jim?
I don't.
Go on.
Anyway, but what I am curious to know is, and while I empathise when you're out you're working, you're making work, and it's unbelievably slow, and nothing's happening. You question why you're doing it. It's all just awful. But then you see something, you experience something, and it's almost like a religious experience. You're moved. I'm wondering, but what my question to you is, do you stop, and does the whole process of experiencing something change the way you work, the way you feel about working? So, do you come out and go, wow, I just saw that, and that was amazing, or do you, even though with all the labor, or is it always just hell until you get into the studio and then you see a picture and you go, then you have that moment? Does the moment happen in the making, or does the moment happen afterwards?
Afterwards.
Okay.
I mean, it might be in the hotel room looking at it on your computers, you're loading them up, or because now we're working digitally. Maybe once or twice ever in my life. Maybe I'm not good enough. I don't make good enough pictures to have that experience that you have, or something. But
No, but it's not about making the picture. It's about
no. I think
witnessing or being in front of something.
When I'm sitting looking at it, or I've printed it out for the studio wall, and you look at it, and you think it's more a sense of relief. Mm-hmm. God, that works. That works, and you think that's in.
Yeah, no,
and as you see those, it's like a piece of a puzzle falling into place, and there's a huge relief. For me, that's more it, because...
But just the wonder of travelling around America and seeing all these places, is that not also pretty amazing for you?
No, it's exhausting.
Right.
I mean, this work was made in 4 weeks. I did 6,000 miles driving, and I took 1 day off.
No, I appreciate that.
It's absolutely...
I'm convinced there's a little bit of you. There's a little bit of you that sees something and goes, "Holy mackerel, that's amazing."
I don't know if maybe you don't feel the same way, but I think we all feel not a fraud, but you always wonder. You always think you're not good enough. There's always better photographers than you. Of course there are, and I think one of the biggest challenges. I mean, I've been making an exhibit and work for 25 years, and I remember 15 years ago, Paul Womble, when he was director of the Photographers Gallery, writing something about Paul Seawright's the most consistent photographer working in Britain today. And I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But being consistent and still being able to make work that has a real value and is contributing and that people want to talk about, I mean, that's the holy grail for me. I mean, that people still want to look at it and that it makes people want to discuss the issues or the work, I love that, and that people want to invite you to talk about it because they think there's something here that isn't somewhere else. They can't find it somewhere else, and that's why you make it. I mean, if we wanted massive audiences, we'd be working in editorial photography. Years ago, Michael Telegraph magazine, Michael Collins, the RUC work, and he said we're going to do it in the Telegraph magazine, and I said fine. So they started the whole process, and then they said they were going to send a journalist to Belfast for a day to go to the police stations, and then he said we need to know exactly where all these spaces are you've photographed and describe exactly. And I thought this work is unraveling by the second.
Yeah.
And I realized it's not for me. So I said no, I don't think it's going to work. And he said there's going to be 1 million people will see this. And I said, no, I'm just going to do the show at the Photographers Gallery. He says, well, how many people are going to see that? And it's not about how many people are going to see it. I mean, I think we make work because we believe in the work and the idea behind the work. And for me, that's the thing that's consistent. And that's the thing I've tried to hold on to. So it's not an ethical thing or kind of that I'm, I think I've got these great opinions to say about things, but that I'm in control of the work, I'm in control of the idea, and I believe I'm still trying to find new ways to intersect with ideas that are out there in the world, and other people are talking about these things all the time. I'm not the only one, but I've got something to contribute to that. And that if someone, God help us, 20 years from now looks back, they'll think there's a body of work there that contributed something to debates about contemporary conflict and contemporary society through my work. I think that's all you're trying to achieve, really.
Paul, thanks a lot. That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you to you both. Huge thanks for being in conversation with us here this evening. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And could I ask you now to make your way into the salle de conférence where a drink awaits you. We're going to clear the room and invite you to come back then for the opening. Thank you.